Thank you for turning in to today's Zero Hedge debate, sponsored by JM Bullion. Today we have Scott Horton versus Meir Javedanfar. He is an Israeli scholar, professor, and we will be debating the topic of how the U.S. should handle the situation with Iran. We're going to be doing kind of a presidential-style debate with myself, Clint Russell, the host of Liberty Lockdown, former vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, and Ami Kozak, who will be handling the I'm too biased, basically. So go ahead and introduce yourself, Ami.
Thank you, Clint. It's good to be here, and I will say I appreciate libertarian spaces because we tend to put ideas and arguments front and center, not character or ad hominem or any of that kind of stuff. So looking forward to a civil discussion. And yes, I'm here to provide the co-moderating roles as a bit of a balance to possibly, Clint's position and echoing Dr. Javedanfar's position on Iran and Israel and Palestine. I am a comedian and commentator. I lean pro-Israel, so it's just good to be here and looking forward to a balanced discussion.
Mr. Horton, if you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, the host of the Scott Horton Show, and editorial director of antiwar.com. And I wrote the books Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, and Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine.
And I'm going to call you Meir, just for ease. If you could introduce yourself to the audience as well.
Hi, my name is Dr. Meir Javedanfar. I'm an Iranian-Israeli researcher and writer and lecturer. I've been teaching various contemporary Iranian history and politics courses for the last 12 years at Reichman University, and I've also been researching Iran-Israel relations both before and after the 79 revolution.
Well,
interesting.
I'm going to start with the strategic interests here. It's a point of contention amongst libertarian audience in the non-interventionist camp, as well as many of the America First or MAGA voters. What are the core U.S. national interests at stake in its policy towards Iran, and how should these guide the choice between interventionist and non-interventionist approaches? We'll start with Mr. Horton.
Well, I mean, America has really, oil interests in the Middle East, but it really doesn't matter who's in charge of which regime. The oil will always be for sale. So, our entire strategic position as the regional hegemon is entirely unnecessary, and it's mostly because of Israel. So, America is Israel's greatest ally, but they're not ours. They don't do anything for us at all. And even when we wage wars for them, they don't even help. You can't even name something that Israel even did for the United States at all over there in the last 20 years, other than helping Obama back al-Qaeda in Syria. But that was Obama helping them back al-Qaeda in Syria, because they hate the Alawites for their alliance with the Shiites in Iran, which is not America's interests at all. America could have made peace with Iran decades ago. In fact, and the scholar here knows far more about this than me, but I'm sure he'll agree, Israel stayed friends with Iran after the revolution of '79 and through the 1980s. That's why when Ronald Reagan, just a couple of years after the Beirut attack, when he switched sides temporarily in the Iran-Iraq war and armed Iran during the Iran-Contra scandal, he used the Israelis as the cutout. You guys give them your missiles and we'll give you some more in order to get those missiles to Tehran. So we could have normalized relations back during the Reagan years. We were already getting along with them enough to sell them missiles. And in 1993, when Bill Clinton came into power, part of his government's idea was we should go ahead and normalize relations with Iraq and with Iran. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had been the national security advisor during the revolution of '79 and had egg all over his face for his humiliation there, but was a leading grand strategist of American foreign policy. By '93, he said we should build a pipeline from the Caspian Basin across Iran. That way to cut them in, make some money, but also find a way to begin warming up relations with them. And, that was just a couple years after the end of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and the idea was we can get along with everybody. The new president, Rafsanjani, was trying to suck up to the West. They even armed al-Qaeda in Bosnia as a favor to Bill Clinton in 1994 and 1995. because they were trying to suck up to the United States. In fact, Alexander Haig, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State, also wanted to build an oil pipeline across Iran as a way to open up relations with them. And guess what, Clint? Israel said no. It was Yitzhak Rabin's government, which was reversing their strategy of the periphery, and said that now they wanted to deal with the Arabs and demonize Iran, who insisted that Bill Clinton, instead of trying to warm up relations with Iraq and Iran, that he keep the bases in Saudi Arabia to wage what was called the dual containment policy against both. And that policy was invented in Israel. And it was Yitzhak Shamir's aide, Martin Indyk, who announced the policy, who convinced Clinton to do it, and announced the policy in a speech at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is a spin-off of AIPAC. So the fact of the matter is that without Israel's intervention, America could have warmed up relations with the Ayatollah's regime back in 1993. We didn't have to have this last 30 years of contention and all these threats and risk of war and all of this stuff. But it's the Israeli burr in America's saddle that is, preventing our government from pursuing a Middle East policy that is actually in the interests of the American people instead of the interests of Israel.
Okay.
Well,
Can I answer that question now?
yeah, absolutely. Meir, I'd love for you to either answer my question or to respond to Scott's
I'll
claims.
respond to what Scott said. The idea that I'm very surprised by some of the imperialistic talk from the United States by people who claim to be anti-imperialist. I think it is very imperialist to say that Iran has no agency, that the Islamic
I didn't
Republic
say
of
that Iran had no
or
agency.
to
Did I
insinuate.
say that?
No.
Hang on. Well, what you are saying is that only Israel has agency here, not the Islamic Republic of Iran.
I didn't say that. I
You
didn't
just said
address
that it's
Iran's
all because
agency
of
at all.
Israel.
What are you
Scott,
talking about?
please.
Hold on. I
interrupt.
just to reset for a second, just so we can avoid interruptions. From my understanding, Scott, of what you were saying, the suggestion and implication is that America's interests in the region are pretty much dictated by Israel throughout this whole process, and that all the actions that have been taken and all the posturing of Iran, we treat them as a rational actor in this, and that if not for Israel's interest, America takes no action at all, and it's all at the behest of Israel. So that's, if I'm mistaken what you're suggesting in your remarks, I'd like to hear Dr. Javedanfar's response to that, if that's the correct implication.
That's
Well,
much
Scott,
closer.
Scott,
That's
you
much
just-
closer to what I said was that Bill Clinton's agency had to take a back seat to Israel's interests. I didn't really discuss what was going on in Tehran at all during that, other than that they were trying to suck up to the U.S. and America was pushing them away. But I
So
didn't
just-
deny that they had agency. What an absolutely idiotic
Okay, well, just
thing to say about any human over the age of 18. All
just to
people have
reframe that,
agency.
I can just to help translate that for a minute. So, Dr. Javedanfar, can you address the claim that essentially all of the actions taken by U.S. in this region have to do much more at the behest of Israel, and that is dictating American policy?
I think to say that the United States takes all its decisions in the Middle East because of Israel is not only inaccurate, it's also insulting to other theories of international relations where agency is given to all sides. I'm not here to tell you that Israel has never made mistakes. Of course that we have made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But to say that the state of Israel is in charge of United States policy towards Iran is completely taking away any agency that the Islamic Republic of Iran has had in its relations with the United States. Since the beginning of the revolution, Israel was trying to set up relations between Iran and the United States because it viewed Iraq as a threat. Now, if you want to talk about that era, I can tell you, within October 79, the CIA was providing information to the Iranians regarding Iraqi plans to invade Iran. The United States was trying to improve relations with the Islamic Republic. It was the Islamic Republic who took US hostages for 444 days. It was the Islamic Republic that killed 240 Marines in October 83 and then blew up the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. Scott, none of these were because of Israel. Now, if you want to talk about 1993, in 1993, let's remember, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, his biggest foreign policy issue, his biggest foreign policy ambition was peace between Israelis and Palestinians, which I think you and I both wanted, if I'm not mistaken. What happened was, the reason why he came up with the dual containment is that soon after the Madrid peace talks, around the Madrid peace talks in 1991, President Rafsanjani said that the Israelis and the Palestinians can reach whatever they want. We will live with it. And he said that, of course. But we also have to take into consideration, and it's crucial that we do, and it's key, that at that time, the person who set Iran's foreign policy was not the president, it was the supreme leader. The supreme leader has much more power when it comes to the foreign policy. And around the same time as Madrid, when your president, President George Bush, of blessed memory, tried to bring peace between us and the Palestinians, the Iranians, around the same time, Ayatollah Khamenei, because of domestic issues also, and also because of his anti-American and anti-Israeli ideology, arranged the conference, invited the heads of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Hezbollah, and they declared that anybody who wants to make peace with Israel is an enemy of the Islamic Republic, and we are going to help anybody who wants to torpedo the peace talks. And since then, we saw Hamas and Islamic Jihad became one of the bloodiest and deadliest enemies of the peace talks. And that undermined US President Clinton, especially, his plans to bring peace into this region, hence why we had the dual containment.
Well, I haven't read Trita Parsi's book, Treacherous Alliance, in a few years. I'd have to go back to the exact timeline and details there. But as he explains, it was Yitzhak Rabin who did want to deal with the Palestinians. He didn't want to give them a real state, but something like a pseudo-type state, and deal with them, and as a way of dealing with the other Arab states. So they turned the strategy of the periphery on its head, where they used to prioritize being friends with Iran, for example, to divide Iraq's attention and the other Sunni Arab states away from themselves. And now they would try to negotiate with the Arabs and turn on the Iranians and demonize the Iranians. And as Parsi shows in his book, it's after that that Iran began to back Hamas.
Not
And,
at all. Sorry, Scott. Can I? Sorry,
and
when you
regardless,
finish.
that has,
Sorry.
and
Just
either
note
way,
the point and then.
there's no reason in the world why that should necessitate America keeping bases in Saudi Arabia to bomb and blockade Iraq and balance and pressure against Iran. And it was that policy more than any other that turned America and Saudi and Britain's Al-Qaeda terrorist mercenaries against the United States. It was when after Rabin was assassinated and his successor Shimon Peres invaded Lebanon, and it was actually Naftali Bennett who called in the artillery strike on a UN shelter and killed 106 women and children at the Qana massacre in 1996. And bin Laden ranted all about that on the first page of his declaration of war against the United States in 1996. And Mohammed Atta and his buddy Ramzi bin al-Shibh, when they read that, they were Egyptian engineering students studying in Hamburg, Germany. And when they read bin Laden's rant about the Qana massacre, these Egyptians signed up to volunteer for a Saudi to attack America to get revenge for what Israel was doing in Lebanon and what Israel was doing in Palestine, and the Israeli-centric policy of keeping American forces in Saudi Arabia. Now, you guys will, in the audience, will note that I never blamed Israel for the 1979 revolution, so that was kind of a funny thing to bring up to refute that, of course, I never said. And in fact, although I didn't address this before, I certainly didn't mean to exclude that there are other humans in the world doing things. For example, there was a whiskey smuggling ring that Kuwaiti intelligence built up into a fake assassination plot against H.W. Bush. And Seymour Hersh debunked this in the New Yorker magazine by the end of the year, case not closed. And it turned out that the Iraqi plot, the Saddam Hussein plot to murder H.W. Bush with a truck bomb in Kuwait was completely fake. And guess what? The guy that made it up was the same guy whose daughter claimed that she saw the Iraqi soldiers throwing the babies out of the incubators in order to lie us into Iraq War I. 2 years later, her father is the one who spun up the truck bomb assassination plot against H.W. Bush, and it was after that that Bill Clinton gave in to Martin Indyk and Yitzhak Rabin and adopted their policy of dual containment. So I'm not saying for a moment that Israel had anything to do with the whiskey smuggling ring or the Kuwaiti plot to frame up this fake scheme, this fake assassination attempt against H.W. Bush. I never said that. There are all kinds of things in motion, but it was Martin Indyk's policy, and he had been Yitzhak Shamir's guy. And he was the one who coined the whole thing, and anyone should read, it's the excellent book, Treacherous Alliance by Trita Parsi, where he shows what's going on behind the scenes in all of this.
Can I respond?
Absolutely, Dr. Javedanfar. But I would also like to
much.
I would like to make sure that you answer my question specifically, because I'm trying to be convinced of your position. Why is Iran or our intervention in Iran in the national interest of the American people specifically?
I'll answer one of the remarks made by Scott, and then I will answer your question. Okay. First and foremost, Trita Parsi in his book takes a huge acrobatic leap over the actions of the Islamic Republic, and he focuses on Israel, and he comes up with a theory that if you test it, it doesn't really stand. He's saying that Israel, after the Cold War, was looking for a new enemy. It was Israel that turned Iran into its enemy. And it was Israel that turned the periphery doctrine on its head. That is factually incorrect and intellectually dishonest. Israel actually supported Iran in the Iran-Iraq war with the hope of improving relations with them. And what Trita Parsi doesn't say is that the Islamic Republic of Iran, instead of using that opportunity to improve relations with Israel and the US, supported Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who started its terror attacks against Israelis in the late 80s. What Trita Parsi doesn't say is that the Islamic Republic supported Hamas, who started its terror activities in the 1990s, early 1990s. I think that's grotesquely dishonest to say that Israel was looking for an enemy when we know that the Islamic Republic tried to blatantly undermine the Madrid peace talks by supporting groups that call for the elimination of the of this country, and has supported the killing and murdering of innocent Israelis in cafes and restaurants. To Trita Parsi, these things don't matter in his argument.
That's not true.
It
That's
is
a damn
true.
lie.
Hang on,
Anyone
no.
can read the book, and he does not ignore Iranian support for Hamas at all. He
Scott,
just puts it in the
let me
correct
speak.
timeline.
Scott, let me speak, please. I try to, you spoke. Let's try to keep this clear for the
What you're
listener.
saying about my friend is incorrect.
What I'm saying about your friend is correct, because his argument, if we put the facts that I gave you into his argument that says it was Israel that turned Iran into an enemy, that argument doesn't stand. How can Israel turn Iran into the enemy when Israel helped Iran in the Iran-Iraq war, and it was the Islamic Republic of Iran that declared war, proxy war on the state of Israel?
Well, you guys can quibble about the timeline and who turned on who first if you want. And as
But
I
that's
said,
very important.
It is, but you just outright stated that he doesn't mention, he completely ignores Iran's support for Hamas. I already said in this interview earlier, in this debate earlier, that as he explains, the Iranians did not begin backing Hamas until after the Rabin doctrine and had changed, and they were excluded from Madrid. and Rabin had officially, inaugurated the reversal of the strategy
That's
of the
incorrect.
periphery. He does not
Scott,
ignore
how can-
Hamas terrorism, and he doesn't ignore Iranian support for it either. That's all in there. And he also does quote Israeli strategists, and this is what's so great about that book, is there's no news cycle BS in it. It's all quotes from the highest level strategists in America, Israel, and Iran. And he has Israeli strategists saying, we needed new glue for the alliance with the United States. After the fall of the Soviet Union, why did they need us? And what we decided on was Islamic fundamentalism, and particularly
what we decided
in Iran.
on, we chose Islamic fundamentalism? That's
To be
absurd.
new glue for the alliance. The reason why America needed to support Israel was to hold back the Islamic horde and all of that, narrative that they are America's, easternmost fort. Or the West's easternmost fort in the Middle East, holding back the tide, and that's why we have to prop them up.
So Islamic terrorists were not killing American citizens, and it's because of, I don't understand, to be honest with you, the idea that it's because of Israel that Al-Qaeda...
invented Islamic fundamentalism. I said they
Stop.
decided that they would use Islamic fundamentalism as the excuse for the alliance, as new glue for the alliance between their country and ours. That's what they said.
Now is the time to take advantage of the power of gold and silver to grow your wealth, whether you're an experienced investor or new to the game. These precious metals have a long history of being a safe haven for your savings, but they also offer growth potential, making them a wise investment choice. So where does the average investor go to buy gold and silver? That's easy. JM Bullion. JM Bullion is one of the most popular and most trusted precious metals retailers in the nation. We offer a huge selection of gold, silver, platinum, and palladium products that can be delivered to your door in safe, discreet, fully insured packaging. From 1 gram of gold to an entire mint box of silver, JM Bullion offers precious metals to suit every financial goal and budget. No matter your budget, now is the time to start investing in precious metals and start protecting yourself and your savings against these volatile markets. Visit jmbullion.com today to take a look at our wide variety of precious metals, rounds, coins, and bars, and find out how you can turn your savings into gold.
So, Scott, I just want to chime in here just for a second, because before it starts to get interrupting, and I do want to come back to Clint's fundamental question, which is sort of what's centered around this, is America's interest in Iran at all, because I think this is fundamental. Scott, you brought up the timeline issue, and in terms of confusing actors and reactors, actions and reactions, this is where the fundamental disagreement is. So can you just talk about, because it sounds like, Scott, you're making this case that's centered around geopolitics and rational actors responding to conditions. And I want to ask this question about, to the extent of whether this is ideologically driven, whether Islamic fundamentalism is a reality that precedes the actions of the West versus a response to actions of the West. So,
Can I make a comment?
As
now?
we've already agreed, Israel got along just fine with the mean old Ayatollah Khomeini throughout his reign. He died in 89.
He turned against us, Scott. He murdered our citizens. We didn't get along with him. We tried to help him in the war, but he killed our citizens. Please, that's ridiculous.
You just said that Israel backed Iran in the Iran-Iraq war, which
But
lasted through
afterwards,
the
they killed our
1980s.
citizens. Afterwards, they killed our citizens. Afterwards, it was 2 years. Hang on, please let me speak. 2 years after that, 3 years after that war, they set up a conference in which they declared proxy war against the state of Israel. Please don't ignore that. And Trita Parsi tries to say that Iran may try to improve relations with America by citing Rafsanjani, but what undermines Trita Parsi, and again he doesn't say this, is that it was Ayatollah Khamenei who set Iran's foreign policy. Trita Parsi just says Rafsanjani, he doesn't say Khamenei. Because Trita Parsi, like you, Scott, also advances the idea that it's because of Israel that Iran and the United States are enemies. And that is completely inaccurate. Now, to answer Clint's question, to reach, hang on, Clint, I'm just going to finish and then you can talk.
I've been waiting for an
Clint
answer
has
on
been
this.
waiting very patiently. Right. Clint, at the end of the day, if you reach a peace deal with the Iranian regime, that will be good for the state of Israel. That will be good. To have American embassy on Iranian soil, to have American diplomats on Iranian soil, that would be great. But you know what, Clint? The Islamic Republic will never let that happen. You know, Vietnam, America did terrible things to Vietnam. In 1975, they broke relations. By 1995, you had relations with Vietnam again. The Islamic Republic, and time again, has refused American offers for a consulate, for embassy. President Obama tried to open up an internet, like a virtual embassy. They shut it down. The Islamic Republic views peace with your country as an existential threat. They believe that peace with America and the presence of American diplomats talking about women's rights in Iran, talking about democracy, bringing American investment in Iran, undermining the companies owned by the regime, that is a threat. That is some see it in Iran as a excuse me, as an existential threat. They believe this is why the Soviet Union fell apart. The representative of the Supreme Leader to the IRGC said, and I can provide the documentation in Farsi if you want, that the reason why the Soviet Union fell apart was that it stopped being a revolutionary state during Gorbachev, and it improved relations with America instead, and that allowed America to infiltrate the ideologies such as democracy and human rights and rule of law, and that's what led to thus convincing the Soviets that the system was bankrupt, and they themselves brought down the system.
Meir, I'm not arguing that we're ever going to be allies with Iran. I'm asking specifically.
Even in diplomatic relations, you're not going to have.
But I'm asking specifically. We don't have to have diplomatic relations with a lot of countries, and that doesn't mean that we have to go to war with them. Why specifically is it in the American people's interest to intervene, to go to war, to bomb Iran?
I don't know. That's a question that Americans have to decide. If you can reach a nuclear deal with them, God bless you. Good luck.
Okay, so you're arguing that it won't happen.
Well, that's good.
I don't know. Look, I don't know. That what your president decides is up to him.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, if America wants to reach a deal, I think it was a terrible mistake for President Trump to leave the Iran nuclear deal.
Hey, we agree.
I think it would be good if there's a new look. You see, we call it geopolitics because geography impacts politics. You guys are living in the U.S. I'm living in Israel. We are much closer to Iran. In my country, unlike yours, and I repeat, in my country, unlike yours, the Iranian regime has sponsored the killing of more than 1,000 Israeli citizens before October 7th. In your country, they haven't.
Right.
In America, buses have not been blown up. Cafes have not been blown up with Iranian money. In Israel, they have. And this makes us much more sensitive to the threat. Now, do I agree with Netanyahu's way of handling Iran? No, I don't. But overwhelming majority of Israelis, including those on the left, don't want this regime to have a nuclear weapon. If you guys can stop it with reaching a deal, God bless you.
Well, from an Israeli perspective, I completely understand. I'm under the impression that there are many people in Israel that would like to see us actually intervene actively, not just stand down and allow Netanyahu to do so. But I have monopolized the time so far. So, Ami, I'd like to have you hop in here.
Yeah, sure. I think it's important to ask like a macro fundamental question as we talk about American intervention. Like, Scott, in your opinion, what is the standard by which a country is justified in going to war to begin with?
Well, it's self-defense only.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is so much of the talk about Iran is when and where and under what circumstances should we attack them, right? Like, we're the Japanese now. We just attack and start wars if that's how we want to do things, which used to be the most, dastardly thing, right? Pearl Harbor will live forever in infamy because of what a morally horrific thing it was for Japan to sneak attack and start a war against innocent old us, right? So we should never be starting wars. And when Joseph Stalin, right, not just Khrushchev, but Stalin, the second worst guy ever, or maybe third, depending on how you rank him,
Mao was
when
first.
he went to get atomic bombs, Truman did not attack the Soviet Union to prevent them from achieving atomic weaponry. The same thing for Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s when Mao Zedong, who quantitatively killed more people than any other person alive. Genghis Khan and Tamerlane combined can't touch Mao Zedong. And when he went to get atom bombs, Lyndon Johnson said, I'm not attacking China to prevent them from getting atom bombs. Do we want nuclear proliferation in the world? No. Should we do everything we can to negotiate the prevention of that? Yes. Should we start a war to stop a country from obtaining a nuclear weapon? Of course not. And even that, of course, not that you did this in your question, but the way I framed it anyway, begs the question of whether Iran is even attempting to achieve a nuclear weapon status, and which, I'd like to explain real quick why that's actually not the case. What they do have is a latent nuclear deterrent. They've proven that they've mastered the fuel cycle and that they could enrich uranium up to weapons grade, and then it's 1940s technology to make a simple gun-type nuke out of that, and they could. And so what they're essentially saying is we got a revolver in one pocket and bullets in the other. Let's not escalate this any further. So this is the same status as Japan, Brazil, and Germany. They have a latent nuclear deterrent. They've proven that they know how to use nuclear material and even create fissionable material. But their entire stance since the Axis of Evil speech in 2002 was where Iraq said, hey, we're not doing anything. Here's a 12,000-page dossier about how innocent we are. Well, that didn't help. America just buffaloed right in there at Israeli behest. We can get back to that if you want to talk about Iraq War II.
No.
The North Koreans said, fine, you're going to bully us out of the treaty, we'll leave the treaty, and they made nukes, and we've left them alone ever since. And the Iranians' position was, our books are wide open. We're members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We have IAEA inspectors at all our nuclear facilities, and the Europeans and everybody else are witnesses. We're not making nukes. You have no pretext for war here. And they were right, of course, that America wanted to go after their enemy, Saddam Hussein, first. And so if they bided their time and were patient, that would work. And that is what worked. By 2005, they had completed the Natanz facility and had begun enriching uranium. And so the Ayatollah's position for the last 20 years essentially has been to have this nuclear capability without the actual nukes. And this is why he was perfectly willing to negotiate the deal with Barack Obama in 2015, where he said, I don't want nuclear weapons. I'm not trying to make nuclear weapons. And yes, I'm willing to expand the inspection regime and dial back the program to a degree in order to reassure you of that. And I absolutely agree with Meir here that it was completely idiotic for Donald Trump to tear up that deal, or at least withdraw American participation in the JCPO in 2018 at Netanyahu's behest, of course, because under that deal, it was with the entire UN Security Council. But unlike a normal Security Council resolution where any one country can veto it, this was majority rule. So it meant that if America, Britain, and France agree, then we get to have our way. And Russia and China can't vote to stop it. When it comes to, we're suspicious of a site and we want to send inspectors there to look at it. And then if they didn't comply, then the entire global sanctions regime automatically snapped back into place. It was a really great deal. And it got such a, and I hate to give Barack Obama or John Kerry credit for anything, quite frankly, I really do. But they bribed them with their own money that Jimmy Carter stole back in '79. That was the pallet of cash, was Iranian money. And that was all they got to scale back their program, expand inspections, and add additional protocols to their safeguards agreement. And again, forever forswear atomic weapons. And that ought to be a good enough basis. Essentially, in other words, long story short, they're saying, don't attack me and I won't make a nuke. And America's saying, don't make a nuke and I won't attack you. So there's a perfect basis for an agreement right there.
So, Meir, I'd love to hear your response to that. And also, Scott does agree that the standard for war is self-defense. And the framing of this question is, should America attack Iran? My question to you is, to what extent does Iran believe it's at war with the United States to begin with, if you think about taking hostages in 7 to 9 since the revolution and attacks since then and funding of terrorism? Forgive me if it's a leading question. I'm curious to what extent we're looking at this the wrong way, as waiting to decide if America should be the initial aggressor or attacker on Iran versus, and also to what extent does that inform the Iranian ideology and ambition? What do you think Scott is missing in his assessment?
Do you think the only reason America would want to attack Iran is because of Israel? That would be the only reason?
Yes, and this is in the New York Times again just 2 days ago, where The Israelis, I think, probably are bluffing, but they're threatening that they'll go ahead and attack Iran, and they might even attack Iran even if Trump gets a deal. And they have the article, the most recent piece is by David
I saw that article. I saw that article.
Let me just say very quickly, I promise I'll stop, but I'm answering your question that you asked me directly here. Israeli sources told Ronan Bergman that, oops, this is the wrong quote. Sorry, I have it right here. They told
I know the article.
It says Netanyahu believes the U.S. would have no choice but to assist Israel militarily if Iran counterattacked. In other words, the Israeli plan, if it comes down to it, is to knowingly force America into a war by starting a war with Iran that they know that they can't finish and that we will have to finish for them. And they're happy to tell that to the New York Times.
Okay. First and foremost, I think it was the right decision for the state of Israel to bomb Iraq's nuclear program. That was a very wise decision that President Reagan was against, and Menachem Begin took it. It was a very right decision to attack Syria's chemical program, 2007. And if the Islamic Republic, who has called for our elimination, not your country, Scott, mine, and if the Islamic Republic was denied the Holocaust, you know, it's incredible, guys, we're living in 2025. The only government in the world that denies the Holocaust, not only denies the Holocaust, makes fun of it by cartoon competition. Let me repeat that. Holocaust cartoon competitions in Iran are held. Not just once or twice, I think 3, 4 times. If such a regime decides to make a nuclear weapon, I think it would be justified for the state of Israel to start war by attacking them. However,
they know that America will have to finish it for them.
Please, God, I know. However, we are at a stage where we have to see what President Trump will deliver. The idea that the Islamic Republic of Iran has always, I don't know if you're saying this, Scott, so forgive me if I'm going to, if I don't get it right. The idea that if Scott or somebody else is saying that the Islamic Republic of Iran has played this nuclear program, it has always been transparent, is completely wrong. They were caught illegally without informing the IAEA about building Natanz. It was Israel who found out and informed the Mujahideen Khalq, who revealed it. It was a centrifuge. Why hide it? Again, Iran was caught building a new enrichment plant at Fordow. If you don't want a nuclear weapon, why hide it? It was again, there was a program to develop nuclear trigger at the Parchin site. They even had a chamber to test surrogate explosives for simulating a trigger mechanism. Again, that the Iranians were caught, and we saw with the documents that the Mossad brought out of Iran, which incidentally also showed that Iran was keeping its side of the deal, but that's a different story. The Iranian regime was proved time and again that it had intention of ultimately having the capability to make a nuclear weapon. Why did it stop? First and foremost, because of Israeli intelligence. Second of all, because the Islamic Republic of Iran insisted on making America into its enemy, not the state of Israel. It was the Islamic Republic of Iran who killed 240 Marines in Beirut, who took US hostages, who attacked the US embassy in Beirut, who took other US hostages in Lebanon, the Khobar Tower bombings in Saudi Arabia in 1996. 19 US servicemen were killed. They were planning to blow up a restaurant in the middle of Washington, D.C. in 2011, and the CIA caught them. The Islamic Republic, with its own policies, has ensured that America becomes its enemy, because the Islamic Republic of Iran, I'm talking about the regime, not the people, views peace with America almost as dangerous, if not more, than war. Because it views peace with the United States as undermining one of its fundamental reasons to exist. And the people of Iran are against this. Polls have shown repeatedly that people of Iran want better relations with the United States. And I tell you what, guys, just to show how much the regime is opposed to having good relations with the US. In Washington, D.C. sits a former Iranian pollster, Mr. Qazi, who took a poll together with Gallup in the early 2000s, showing that majority of Iranians want to have good relations with the US. And what did the regime do to an Iranian pollster who showed this? Put him in jail for 3 years. 1 year of those was in solitary confinement for just publishing a poll in Iran showing the people of Iran want better relations with the United States. Scott, the biggest enemy of peace between your country and Iran is not my country. It is Ali Khamenei.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of things there. First of all, is pouring in their tens or hundreds of millions to do another color-coded revolution, as they attempted to do with the Green Revolution in 2009. And yes, USAID and NED did help to finance that. And you can read it in right-wing media. In America, Newsmax.com has a thing by Timmerman, who I think was at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, explaining it. And don't interrupt me. You just got to make 15 false claims, so I'm going to refute them now. In Osirak in 1981, Saddam Hussein had an open declared nuclear facility at Osirak that was inspected by the IAEA. And when Israel bombed it, all they did was drive it underground. And the CIA and the Israelis did not know that, in fact, Saddam Hussein did begin building a secret nuclear weapons program in the 1980s in reaction to Osirak, to that attack. And then that wasn't discovered until the aftermath of Iraq War I, when America occupied
George Bush was right to invade Iraq.
What?
So he did have weapons of mass destruction. What you are saying is that he did have weapons of mass destruction, right?
Listen, with your ear holes. 1980s. At the end of Iraq War I, in 1991, America occupied all of southern Iraq and found Saddam Hussein's secret nuclear weapons
91?
program. It was not very advanced, but it did exist, and it came into existence in reaction to that ridiculous Israeli blunder of launching a preemptive attack on an open, declared, inspected civilian nuclear facility. That is the exact truth. And then the rest of the truth is, unlike what you just said, that Iraq did not have any form of nuclear program whatsoever after 1991, nor did they have any program to develop chemical or biological weapons in that country after the first Gulf War. Now, you said, why hide Natanz? The reason to hide Natanz was because America did everything in the world that they could to intervene. And there's something called the Nuclear Suppliers Group, which is essentially a monopoly controlled by the nuclear weapon states on nuclear technology. And they refused to let Iran buy any enrichment equipment. So they went to the black market and they bought it from A.Q. Khan, the Pakistani nuclear weapons scientist, the same as Libya and North Korea eventually did buy some equipment from him. And that was what they originally had started spinning up at Natanz. And so they clearly wanted to have the facility done before they announced it, but it was not the Israeli Mossad and the Mujahideen Iqalq. It was actually David Albright, the American nuclear weapons wonk, who originally found Natanz and published that. And then Israel, dude, you should take it up with David Albright. He'll fight you over it. He's got the timeline. David Albright brought it up. Then Israel funneled that to, and who's the Mujahideen Iqalq? They're a communist terrorist cult that used to work for the Ayatollah, who then went to work for Saddam Hussein and now are sock puppets of the Israelis. And they just 2 weeks ago announced a big fake intelligence scheme. Look at these aerial pictures of a giant secret nuclear facility. The NCRI, that's MEK, announced, and it was totally fake. And no intelligence agency anywhere in the world, even the Israelis, I don't think, publicly supported that as being true. Then he mentions the nuclear triggers. Funny you don't mention that Benjamin Netanyahu was part of a group that stole Krytrons from the United States. back at the time. He was working with Arnan Milchan, the famous American movie producer. There are Israeli spies stealing nuclear
How
triggers
that
from
related
America.
to
And then-
Iran?
Don't interrupt me.
Nuclear-
Don't interrupt me. You can go on and on with your BS as soon as I'm done. And your whole thing about Parchin and the nuclear triggers at Parchin is completely debunked. The scientist in charge at Parchin was a guy named Danchenko, whose speciality was making nano diamonds for industry. He had no speciality in making nuclear weapons or nuclear triggers whatsoever. That's completely debunked. You have no idea what you're even talking about. You didn't even know the guy's name. His name's Danchenko, and what they said was he went to this university in Moscow where nuclear research also happens. Yeah, well, he didn't participate in any of that. His expertise was in making nano diamonds. Then you mentioned why Iran doesn't want to make nukes. Well, according to the National Intelligence Estimate of 2007, when the CIA and the other intelligence agencies finally officially came out and debunked the lie that they were pursuing nuclear weapons, they said it was because, yes, it came out in November 2007. Anyone can read it. And their conclusion was, since America got rid of Iran's greatest enemy, Saddam Hussein, and put their best friends, the Badr Brigade and the Supreme Islamic Council and the Dawa Party in power in Baghdad at Israeli behest, that now the Ayatollah didn't even need to feign a pursuit of atomic weapons as a deterrent against Saddam, because now his friends ruled Baghdad thanks to Richard Pearl and George W. Bush. Then you mentioned the Beirut bombing of 1983. First of all, that was 42 years ago. Second of all, Ronald Reagan sold the missiles just a couple of years after that, and it didn't bother the Israelis whatsoever at the time. They kept selling them weapons all through the 1980s, so don't give me crocodile tears about that. And according to Viktor Ostrovsky, the former Israeli spy, Israel knew that the attack was coming and said that's what the Americans get for sticking their nose into our business, and did not warn the United States. Anyone could read the book, Viktor Ostrovsky, By Way of Deception, where he explains about that. And that wasn't Iran that did that anyway. It was proto-Hezbollah and Iran-backed militia there. But there's no proof that that attack was ordered by Tehran. And then Khobar Towers, that's an absolute lie that Iranian-backed Saudi Hezbollah did the Khobar Towers. That was Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed who did that, and the CIA knows that. Michael Scheuer, the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit himself, told me that. And Osama bin Laden himself bragged about it and took credit for the attack to Abdel Bari Atwan. And who was the target, Clint and Ami? The target was American airmen, whose job it was to bomb Iraq from bases in Saudi. In other words, provoking the September 11th attack against the United States. And then he mentions the 2011 restaurant plot. Again, a complete hoax. The guy wasn't even part of the royal family. The ambassador at the time was a nobody. And all that happened was it was a drug deal that got intercepted, and this guy was a used car dealer who couldn't find his car keys. And they said he was recruited by Hezbollah into this plot to blow up and assassinate this guy at a restaurant in Washington. It's a ridiculous hoax.
Scott,
a damn lie.
I gotta hop in.
Okay.
I gotta hop in. You hit him. You bombarded him. Meir, I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to respond, but then I want to ask another question, please.
The idea that Israel, everything that's been fact proven that the Islamic Republic has undertaken is a lie. That the Islamic Republic of Iran, all these things that I mentioned that have been fact proven, or it's just a conspiracy theory. It really, it's really beggars belief that the Islamic Republic has always been so, it is not guilty of any of these factors, even though there have been commissions and all the respected newspapers have reported on it. So Scott can believe whatever he wants to believe, but the United States has paid.
Career.
The United
was
States
he
has
nuclear
paid.
trigger
Scott,
guy, or
let
was
him
he a
finish.
nano diamonds guy? It's one or the other.
Nano diamonds guy. Okay.
Mayor, can you just
Yes, you just don't know what you're talking about, and you're
No,
upset that your claims are
I just
debunked
think
is
that
all.
you're coming up with theories that I completely disagree with the sources, and I think that this is what we see. To believe that Iran has always been the victim in all these cases of conspiracy theories just is beggars belief. That Iran has just been continuously. You just said that Iran has been a victim. Scott, that's in a world of fantasy, not in the real world
All
of
I did was
fact.
catalog a lot of lies that you told. That's
Right?
Mayor,
No, hang on. Your
I
question
never argue for
is
the Ayatollah's
Clint,
innocence,
your
just on the
question.
things you falsely accused him of.
Yeah, let me-
What do you think Meir Iran wants? What do you, is it? Do you think the presumption is Scott is saying they want to be welcomed by the community of nations, and these gestures to welcome them in is the way to go? Is there something else at play? Do you think it's what's that?
I didn't say that.
Well, that the idea, the strategy should be that it should be one of. Well, my question is, what do you think really drives the Iranian regime? What do they want? Do they want? I'm not presuming them. That's what you're saying, Scott. But do you think they want to be part of this community of nations and trade with the West and have peace with the West, have peace with Israel, have peace with America? What do they want?
You know, Ami, can I just make a quick point about the United States and Iran? The
Yes.
people of Iran have not had a better friend than the United States. Your country's been a wonderful friend to the people of Iran. Okay, it was the United States that pressured Stalin to leave Iranian territory in 1946. If it wasn't for President Truman, Stalin would have continued to occupy the Iranian territory, and he helped to create the Azerbaijan Autonomous Republic and the Mahabad Autonomous Republic in order to undermine Iranian sovereignty. Iranians, we owe a great debt of gratitude to President Truman. It was American weapons that allowed Iran to stand up to Iraq in 1969 by driving by this Abu Sina ship in the middle of the Shatt al-Arab to take half of the Shatt al-Arab for Iranian sovereignty, which should have been the case because the Iraqis have been cheating Iran since 1937. It was American development aid that created a lot of centers of education and training for Iranian doctors. And I think the people of Iran, in the West, have not, in modern history of Iran, have not had a better friend than the United States of America. However, the Islamic Republic of Iran is ideologically opposed to good relations with the United States. We saw that time and time again, even after the nuclear deal with Obama. The nuclear deal went into effect in 2016. Soon afterwards, the Iranian regime arrested a dual Iranian-American citizen, Siamak Namazi, who wanted what Scott wants, good relations between Iran and the United States. Then to make sure that American companies can't invest in Iran because the regime doesn't want its business interests undermined, they tested 2 missiles with writing in Hebrew that Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth. What do you think that does to foreign investment in Iran? That's exactly what you would do if you want to undermine foreign investment in Iran. And this is why, according to Javad Zarif, in the first year after the nuclear deal, there was only like $2 billion worth of investment in Iran, where they were hoping for, $80 billion. The Islamic Republic, the regime, I'm talking about the hierarchy. I'm not talking, in Iran you have dual system. You have revolutionary institutions headed by the supreme leader and all the organizations that he heads, and then you have Republican institutions who are elected in elections, of course, controlled by the revolutionary institutions. Time and time again, there have been presidents in Iran who have wanted to have good relations with the US, even Ahmadinejad, even mad old Ahmadinejad. But the supreme leader doesn't want it for ideological reasons, and because he believes that good relations with America would undermine the legitimacy of his regime. Good relations with America is viewed as the Berlin Wall in terms of the regime's ideology and also its business reasons. The regime doesn't want good relations with your country because there are many regime organizations who produce everything from tomato puree to cars, and if America comes in, Iranians would prefer to buy their products because they are better quality, and that would undermine its interests.
So,
the biggest
Dr.
enemy of peace between Iran and the United States is Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei.
Dr. Meir, you scoffed at the open when Scott alleged that most of our Middle Eastern policy, America's Middle Eastern policy, has been predicated off of Israel's interests.
Yes.
I've always wanted to ask, what do you make of the clean break doctrine authored by Richard Pearl, David Wormser, and Douglas Feith in 1996? It was the neoconservative kind of game plan for the Middle East. If that doesn't convince you, you then also had General Wesley Clark in 2007 that stated that shortly after 9/11, he was informed that the U.S. had a plan to take out Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off with Iran. I've always wanted to ask an Israeli scholar about this, so I'm going to take the opportunity while I have that chance. It sure sounds to me like we have a plan of conquest in the Middle East. That clean break doctrine was authored by American neoconservatives, but it was sent to Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996. He then basically redlined the things that he didn't like, and he authorized the things that he did. That seems as if our foreign policy has been dictated for the past 30 plus years by Israel. How am I wrong?
Clint, to say that Israel has no influence in Washington, D.C. would be fantasy. Of course we try to have influence. We have relations with the world's greatest power and with one of our best friends, of course, it's very normal. But to believe that America invaded Iraq because of Israel, that's inaccurate. When they came to Israel, from my understanding, when they came to talk to the Israeli government, I'm talking about Israeli government officials, they said we want to attack Iraq. And what did the Israelis say? Attack Iran. Don't attack Iraq. Attack Iran.
First.
But they didn't listen. They attacked Iraq, number one. Number two, all these persons that you're talking about, Wunzer, etc., they were not employees of the Israeli government. I don't understand how the opinion of American Jews in the US government can be construed as having, they are carrying out Israeli policy. Please, Clint, you live in a superpower. You guys have to accept some agency for your mistakes. So do we. Of course, we have to accept agency for some of our mistakes. But you guys also have to step up and to take agency for your mistakes, which included the Iraq war. To say that it was because of Israel takes away any agency that the United States. You have a president, you have the CIA. George Tenet said that the WMD was a slam dunk. Was that the expression he used? These are decisions made by the United States. If you were going to do it at behest of Israel, the Israelis said attack Iran. The Israelis had already realized that Iran was the biggest danger. But you guys decided to attack Iraq. And, that was a mistake. I understand we now know that was a mistake. And it also cost Israel.
Okay, but Dr. Meir, just to be clear, the reason I'm asking it is that you have this game plan that's being laid out in 1996. You also have the confirmation that this game plan existed immediately after 9/11. We then invaded a bunch of countries that had nothing to do with 9/11, and you're telling me that that's just a mistake, as opposed to a game plan that was dictated by Zionists in America.
Clint, America can make mistakes without Israel.
Well, just our mistakes happen to benefit Israel every time. Isn't that odd?
But that doesn't mean that Israel is responsible. And tell me, how is it serves Israel's interest that Iraq is now under Iranian control? How does that serve our interest?
I'm being too contentious, so let Scott go.
Well, look, here's the thing. He's right. George W. Bush is not Jewish, right? George W. Bush is, the son of Episcopalians or Anglicans or whatever. I think he fashions himself a Methodist. Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and Condoleezza Rice and George Tenet, none of the principals in the W. Bush administration were Jewish Zionists or Jewish spies or Israeli agents or spies sent here to represent a foreign power. But boy, all their guys were, John Hanna and Robert Joseph and Zalmay Khalilzad and Stephen Hadley and Richard Pearl and Douglas Feith, Gene Kirkpatrick and Ken Edelman and Abram Shulsky and Michael Maloof and Michael Rubin and Michael Ledeen. These are the people who staffed, and John Bolton is not an actual neoconservative, but he's a fellow traveler very close to them. These are the people who staffed the Vice President's office, the National Security Council, the State Department, and the Pentagon. They marginalized people like Colin Powell and his right-hand man, Dick Armitage, at state.
Why? Because they're Israeli spies? Please say what they are. Please say what you think these people are.
They were most of them acting as agents of influence for Israel, and the ones who.
What is your evidence?
I have that from Colin Powell's chief of staff.
Right. So that makes it all right then.
Yeah. What does Colin Powell's chief of staff know about what was going on in the first W. Bush
administration? So I can bring you 10 other people in the U.S. administration who say they were not. So that's okay then.
You asked me a direct question. You don't want to let me answer it? Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson told me that Douglas Feith and David Wormser both were acting directly as agents of the Israeli state. The rest of these guys all have essentially, a strong ideological commitment to neoconservatism. They're not all Israeli spies. To many of them, and John Bolton is one who said this explicitly numerous times, America's interests and Israel's interests are exactly the same. So they don't see it as serving a foreign power. They see it as just doing what they think is right anyway. But it's not. And you call these all mistakes, but they're the mistakes that were on the Likud's list. Now, you're right, too, that Ariel Sharon said, no, I want you to go to Tehran first. And he was the prime minister during September 11th. But as God damn it, as J.J. Goldberg from The Forward did a long expose on this, explaining that inside the Likud, there was a big split. And Sharon was the Iran hawk, and Netanyahu was the Iraq hawk. And the neoconservatives in America were much closer to the Netanyahu faction inside Likud at that time. And now J.J. Goldberg says the same thing that you said and the same thing that I just said, which is these men did not do it. It was W. Bush that pulled that trigger, 100%. And Dick Cheney, they were the ones responsible for that. But these were the men, and this is what John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt make an ironclad case in their book, The Israel Lobby and American Foreign Policy, that the war could not have happened without the neoconservatives acting as the vanguard of the Israel lobby in the United States. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee also avowedly pushed for the regime change there. And I have in my book enough already. I have quote after quote after quote from people involved saying that this is what had happened. In fact, Condoleezza Rice's deputy, Philip Zelikow, said that what this is really about is Saddam Hussein gave money to the families of suicide bombers. He gave money to any Palestinian family who someone died, in conflict with Israel. But that included suicide bombers. So in a sense, Saddam Hussein was paying a bounty to the families of suicide bombers. And this was something that Wolfowitz and them would bring up from time to time. And as Zelikow said, this is not something that they wanted to really emphasize to the American people, because blowing up a bus in Tel Aviv is bad, but it's not in Texas, and it's not even in New York. And so it's not the kind of thing that would be a good enough reason for the American people to go to war. But was that the reason the neoconservatives wanted to go to war? Absolutely it was. And one more thing, and then I promise I'll stop and let you go as long as you want. America, the U.S. government, has been a very good friend, not to the Iranian people, but to the Iranian regime. And in fact, the worst thing that the Ayatollah Khamenei has done in this century was his government backed the Iraqi National Congress. They had a headquarters office in Tehran, and it was Ahmed Chalabi and his friends from this, fake Iraqi government in exile. They were the ones who, first of all, sold David Wormser and Richard Pearl on the idea that overthrowing secular Sunni Saddam in Iraq would weaken and hurt Iran rather than benefit them. And secondly, they were the ones who funneled about 2/3 of the lies of the weapons of mass destruction through the Feith-run Office of Special Plans in the Pentagon and straight up to the Vice President's office and to the American media to lie us into war. And then what happened? When America invaded Iraq, they took the Badr Brigade, the Dawa Party, and the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, who've been living in Iran for 20 years since the Iranian Revolution, and took them all the way to power in Baghdad. So that was what George W. Bush and the United States of America did for Iran, was overthrow secular Sunni Ba'athist Saddam and put their best friends from Dawa in power in Baghdad. There's a guy from the Supreme Islamic Council is the prime minister right now, Sudani. He lived in Iran for 20 years. So did Maliki, so did Jafari. All of these guys are Iranian agents, and that's who Iraq War II benefited more than anyone else. And then this is why America also supported the jihadi war against Assad in 2011, was if we put Iran up 2 pegs in Baghdad, we got to try to take them down a peg in Damascus. And this is what has finally been fulfilled now as of last December, when Al-Qaeda finally succeeded in sacking Damascus and overthrowing the government there. And this is why, to make up for the fact that America did what Israel wanted and overthrew secular Sunni Saddam, but that backfired. And so now they had to make up for that by putting America back on the side of the jihadists, as long as it's against the Shiites and their friends. Even though it wasn't Hezbollah that knocked down our towers, it was the radical Sunni vanguard of the Al-Qaeda bin Ladenite movement of bin Laden and Zawahiri, the enemies of Iran, that did that attack on our country.
Well, I would like to have this
Can I ask
debate
a
go.
question? Can I-
Yeah, but
Please,
real quick. Yeah, just real quick. I just wanted to say, massive thanks to Zero Hedge for putting this debate on. I could have it go for 2 full hours, but because we do not have that amount of time, I'm going to have to go to closing arguments. I want to again thank our sponsor, which is J.M. Bullion, and I will start with Dr. Meir.
I just want to. Is there a mistake, Scott, that America has made in the Middle East, which you think Israel is not responsible for?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest ones was in 2015 when Barack Obama switched sides in the war in Yemen. He had been backing the Houthi. In fact, the Houthi takeover of Sana'a was.
So there is something. Okay,
blowback.
so at least there is something. Thank
Already.
God. There's one thing
But
we're
that
not
was for
responsible
Saudi
for.
and- that was
That's
for Saudi
amazing.
and UAE, not Israel.
That is amazing. Okay, so wow,
Oh, it's
Mazal tov to
amazing.
Israel.
You
We
should read my
we
book
fell
enough
asleep at the
already to be
wheel there
amazed.
because for what I can understand
We overthrew the
is that we
Taliban
were
upon
just
war in
basically
Afghanistan
the
for 20
puppet
years.
masters of America before the invasion of Iraq.
That's all you have is
The
this strong
CIA. Hang on, I
right-hand
didn't
crap,
interrupt
really?
you. I didn't interrupt you, please. So the CIA and the FBI completely missed out on Israeli agents in Washington infiltrating the
No, the
American
FBI the
decision-making
FBI investigated them
circles,
all. No,
pulling the
you're wrong.
strings,
The FBI
and making
investigated
America
them.
attack Iraq
Read
at
it
the
in the
behest
Washington
of
Post,
Israel.
pal.
Because what you're saying is all these people you just mentioned are Israeli agents, and they did the job to convince Bush on behalf of Israel. So Israel was sitting here and just pulling the puppet master in Tel Aviv and was running these people in Washington, and the CIA and the FBI had absolutely no idea. That is fantasy. That
Meir,
is the world of Russia
Goes in on
today. That is the world, hang on, that is the world of Walt and Mearsheimer, who believe that Israel is the country that is most responsible for the invasion of Iraq. Nothing to do with Saddam Hussein blockading the inspectors.
ratted on these
Nothing to
guys.
do- Hang on. I
The CIA
hang on,
told this story
Scott,
about
you
the
just
neoconservatives.
spoke for
Pause for a
10
second.
minutes.
Scott, you did go. You went uninterrupted for a while, Scott.
Investigated
Scott.
them, so you're just wrong.
Come on, man.
And I never said that. So
You can
you're
think he's
ridiculous.
wrong. I just would like to
you're
hear his
saying
response uninterrupted.
America, you attacked Iraq because of all these 10 people you mentioned, and that they were acting on the behest of Israel. So that means that you have no CIA, that means you have no FBI,
doesn't
that would
mean that.
insinuate, hang on, because all
No.
these people would have had to receive secret communications from the state of Israel, either from the Israeli embassy at drop-off points, probably maybe Mossad, or maybe the Israeli, getting secret cables, telling them to convince the Americans to attack Iraq. Because that's what Israeli influence over that decision would mean. Or
Yes.
there's the alternative that these people are Americans who make decisions. They may be pro-Israel, but they make their own decisions. They advise the government based on their own view, not because they're getting messages from Israel or because they believe that America is the client state of Israel. You make that mistake to attack America, to attack Iraq. Those people are American citizens who have a right to have whatever beliefs they want, but what they don't have a right to is to be a spy or agent of influence of another country. And there's nothing from the CIA or the FBI that says
Wrong.
that these people were running the operation at the behest of Israel. So you cannot blame Israel for the mistake that was made in Iraq.
You have no idea what you're talking about. The CIA started ratting on the neoconservatives. Melvin Goodman, a former CIA
Did
officer.
they catch any spies? Did
he
they
ran
catch
his
any
first-
Israeli spies?
Melvin Goodman
Right.
said that the neoconservatives in the Pentagon are lying us into war for Israel. Former CIA officer in September of 2002. It was CIA guys who told the truth about the Office of Special
Right.
Plans. It was Karen Katowski, the Air Force officer, who said Israeli generals were walking around the Pentagon like they own the place. And it was the FBI who, in fact, did investigate the neoconservatives in the Pentagon.
And what did
leading
they
to
find?
cries of anti-Semitism and all the rest.
Did they
were-
find? Oh, really? So why is that they caught Jonathan Pollard then? If the FBI is scared of anti-Semitism, why did they catch Jonathan Pollard?
I didn't say they were scared of it. I said
You just
they
said that because of anti-Semitism. So if the FBI didn't find spies, then it must be because of those Israelis pulling. Oh, come on. Well, come on, this is not Russia today, okay? This is a serious conversation.
Dr. Javedanfar, if you can, just to button up this back and forth, can you just give, and then go into your closing statement, Meir, your perception of events, because Scott has presented it in this way. It seems to me a little bit from my perspective that, you're drawing the target around the arrow a little bit, but in your perception of the events, in terms of interest aligning and the clean bake strategy, and in terms of what motivated America to act in the region in response to being attacked, how do you perceive those seeming coincidences or interest aligning from the clean bake strategy to the way Israel operated to the way America operated? Because on the optics, it presents a certain way, and you're disputing that, which I understand. So from your perspective, what's the nuance there? What's the alternative viewpoint about why things played out the way they play out?
I think the American administration at that time made a strategic error in interpreting intelligence, and Saddam Hussein was also hiding this intelligence from the Americans. And we had a war because President Bush wanted democracy for Iraq. Okay? He wanted to turn Iraq into a democratic state, and he wanted also, of course, the whole idea that they wanted, this Wilsonian idea of exporting liberal democracy. And they had their own, set of priorities. It was, the question: if Saddam was not cooperating, misinterpretation of intelligence. The Americans wanted to introduce democracy, and of course there was oil interest. Of course there was, and this is why we had that situation. This is why the war did not turn out to Israel's interests, which is why Israeli officials, when the Americans wanted to attack Iraq, they said you should attack Iran, because at that time they were viewing Iran as the bigger threat. Now, I can understand Israel has made many mistakes. Please believe me, we are a country, we've been around since 1948, we've made good decisions and we've made terrible decisions. The decision to invade Iraq was not ours. This was not ours. This was a decision by the United States.
Dr. Meir, can you acknowledge at least that neither Iraq or Iran had anything to do with 9/11?
Correct.
So
the Iranians allowed some of the again, there's been I have to look into this. So with that caveat, some of the bombers had crossed the Iranian territory, but that's the only thing. I mean, overall, no, 9/11 was not the Iraqi or Iranian job. No.
Right. So that's the reason for the question as to all of these countries that are laid out as to be in the line of fire in terms of conquest for the U.S. empire. It's laid out in 1996. It's confirmed in 2001, right after 9/11, that they had a plan to take out these 7 countries. 6 of these 7 countries have fallen, but you have this one remaining, which is Iran, which you happen to have Netanyahu being the war drums against. And you're telling me these are just mistakes on behalf of Americans. This is not in Israeli interest. You can understand why that kind of beggars belief, right?
Well, first of all, the document that you're talking about, I don't believe it was. First of all, I haven't heard that much about it. Number 2, I don't think Israel will publish a document like that as an official document that can, in the future, if something goes wrong, that would be used against it if Israel was behind such a document. Number 3, we see that the people who took those decisions had nothing to do with Israel. If it happens, in your view, to have served Israeli interests, which it didn't, but because you believe that it incidentally serves Israel's interest, then Israel must be responsible. That doesn't stand up. That would not stand up in any court.
I mean, it's a letter written to Netanyahu. To say it's
the
not.
Truth is, but Clint, there are all sorts of strategies and plans that have been in place over time, and hindsight's 20/20 to be able to draw some sort of pattern in the past when you look back.
But this is 7 countries laid out. Allegedly documented. I think it was. I don't know if it was Cheney or. I don't know if it was.
I think I can clarify, guys. This is not an official government document. It was written by David Wormser primarily, and co-signed by Richard Pearl and Douglas Feith. Feith now disavows it entirely, by the way. But it was written for Netanyahu, and there's a companion piece that goes with it called "Coping with Crumbling States," and then they wrote a book called Tyranny's Ally, America's Failure to Remove Saddam Hussein from Power in Iraq, which is by Wormser with a foreword by Pearl. And it's all the same thing over and over again, and it's all got Ahmed Chalabi's name in it.
And
the Ayatollah's man sent to lie to the American Zionists and promise them that if America, and this is the whole point of it.
Only American Zionists. No American was involved. Only American Zionists.
No, they're Americans.
If the American government or the Israeli government could succeed in overthrowing Saddam Hussein in Iraq, that would lead to Shiite control, but the Shiites will be compliant with us, and they'll obey Turkey and Jordan and be friends with Israel. The Shiite clerics will order Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran, and the democracy in Iraq will be so great that it'll be a nightmare, quote, a nightmare for the Iranian regime to have a free Shiite supermajority ruled Iraq. This was the whole plan, and it was a bunch of smoke being blown up their rear ends by an Iranian agent, Ahmed Chalabi, who was working for the Ayatollah and who essentially was telling the American neoconservatives what they needed to hear to get America to do this for Israel. And I'll remind your audience, too,
For
that
Israel.
Benjamin Netanyahu came and testified to the U.S. Congress
God,
and urged
so the
them
Iranians
to attack
sent a
Iraq.
spy to America to do something that Israel wanted? So the
He said
Iranians sent a
Benjamin
spy to
Netanyahu-
America to get to do something for Israel? How does that
Benjamin
work?
Netanyahu came and testified and said, I promise if you get rid of Saddam Hussein, it's going to have positive reverberations.
He
throughout the
wasn't in
regions."
power, Scott.
And
He
one more
wasn't
thing-
in power. He was an individual. He wasn't in power, and that was a
Yes, the entire-
stupid thing to do.
And then another thing is that you said that about the FBI and the CIA having no idea about this. Again, the CIA were the ones ratting on the neocons in the American media. The FBI investigated them, and there's great journalism by Julian Borger in The Guardian in a piece called "The Spies Who Pushed for War" about how Ariel Sharon created his own Office of Special Plans. And again, you're right that he wanted to go after Iran first, but once it was clear that Bush and the Americans wanted to do Iraq, he said, okay, fine. And he got on board for that and helped push. And he had his own men bypass Mossad and manufacture fake intelligence in English to funnel into the American intelligence stream. It's also in the book, A Pretext for War by James Bamford, but anyone can pull it up right now. The Guardian, Borger, The Spies Who Pushed for War. And Karen Katowski, the Air Force Lieutenant Colonel whistleblower, can verify Israeli generals walking around going straight to Doug Feith's office like they own the place, refusing to even wait for their escorts to take them to his office.
And just,
Yes, Mayor, what's your
One
response?
point, just one point, just one little point, just one sentence. If Israel did not exist, America would still have, is a very high probability, if not certainty, that America would still have attacked Iraq.
Oh, please.
Also, it feels like it's awfully a cinematic view, Scott, of how these things play out, as if these and it feels very convenient to notice these patterns rather than looking at it as a much more complex interest that align at various points in time, much more gray areas here, rather than finding the one assistant chief of staff who said this one thing, and that's the big whistleblower. So when I hear these points
I wrote
being
a
made,
book about it. You should read it.
yeah. All right,
fair enough.
Let me
But
just,
that's just where I think the objection is, like the way you paint this narrative as if it's in this sort of cinematic fantasy sort of way.
Just
So
because
in
it
the
happened,
H.W. Bush years,
it's
H.W.
When you
Bush
look
called
back,
the-
hindsight's 2020. That's
H.W. Bush called the neoconservatives the crazies, and they were to be kept in the basement. They were allowed to work on South America policy or Latin America policy, but they were not allowed to mess with the Middle East. When W. Bush got elected, Dick Cheney hired them to all of the most important positions in his office, on the National Security Council, and in the State Department and then the Pentagon. And Colin Powell said they operated what he called, quote, a separate government directly under the control of Dick Cheney. And he referred to the Office of Special Plans in the Pentagon as Feith's Gestapo office. That was the words
I don't think
of
Israel
Colin
would
Powell.
choose an
But
office
these men,
that's
they called
Gestapo.
themselves the cabal. And their goal was to lie us into war with Iraq
and
Israel.
to clarify, this this is not a made-up thing that I'm claiming. It's a clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm. It still exists as a PDF on DougFeith.com. He was one of the co-authors on it. And additionally, I don't think that this is a cinematic retelling of history. This is basically looking at empirical facts in hindsight and cross-referencing them against claims made by very prominent people like General Wesley Clark, who said that in '01, right after 9/11, they had a list of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. 6 of those 7 have already been either bombed, conquered, toppled, or whatever, either by the U.S. or by Israel. I don't think that that's cinematic to make that claim.
There's also that. Hang on, Scott, hang on.
It was Israel that brought all that policy
Also
back up.
Israel.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I've never realized my country was such an incredible superpower. You know, if everything that Scott says, that we, as a country of 8 million, we are a country of genius superpowers who are, you know, who are running America. I only, you know,
Listen,
right.
Hang
on.
Read the Wall Street Journal or any,
Hang on, Scott. You know, the reason why those countries
will say
1 second.
that Israel, look, AIPAC ranks right up there with the AARP and the NRA as one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington, D.C. That's no conspiracy theory. That's the Wall Street
We
Journal.
run America.
The
All these Israelis run America. That's amazing.
Clint, I assume we have to come to an ending soon. But Meir, you had a point in response to Clint saying these are simply, we're looking at claims being made, we're squaring them with reality. What was your response to
Clint,
that?
you know, maybe the reason why some of those countries were attacked is because they attacked your country. Do you not
Which
think
ones?
that's also a possibility?
Which ones of those 7 which attacked
Iraq,
America?
The one you
in
say
Syria.
Iraq. Well, you're talking about Iran. Hang on, Iran killing your citizens in Al Khobar, supporting terrorists who were killing American citizens. You're talking about Sudan. First of all, I don't know that document in specific. I haven't read it, but let's just say it does. Is Douglas Fay an Israeli employee? Is he on the payroll of the Mossad? If he is, then you're absolutely right. But if an American citizen decides to publish a policy paper on his website that happens to also be in line as a consequence with Israeli interests, that does not mean that he's on the payroll of the Israeli government or that he's an American agent of influence.
I'm not arguing that he's not an American. I'm arguing he is an American that sent that letter that ended up becoming our policy under the George W. Bush administration in the early 2000s, and all of those plans were carried out. After that letter was sent to Netanyahu, that is a coincidence.
So he sent a letter to Netanyahu, so that Israel is behind this? If every letter sent from Washington to Israel can be taken as a sign that Israel is controlling everything, then you should shut down your Congress and Senate.
Well,
we will
I agree
just
with
run
that.
everything from the Knesset.
Wait, we're
Don't get him started.
things. The clean break document from 1996 and the 7 countries in 5 years document are totally different things.
I know.
Right. I just want to make sure I actually made that mistake earlier, I think, when I said, yeah, it wasn't a government document. I was talking about the clean break, but I think you guys have been referring to the Pentagon document. It absolutely was from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, according to General Clark. And General Clark told me in our debate on Pierce Morgan that, yeah, it was the Israelis, that it was their agenda that was represented in that 7 countries document.
Yeah,
But you see, I hear like just because there's agreement between one Israeli official and a neoconservative in America, we make it seem as if there's this conspiracy.
The whole thing. Because
Netanyahu agrees about Iraq, and he's wrong, and so is the entire Democrat and Republican Party.
It's a pretty odd coincidence that in that letter and in that claim by Wesley Clark that there's these 7 nations, which, by the way, he made in the mid-2000s, and many of those nations toppled after the fact, proving out the claim that, in fact, that list was accurate. And the only one remaining on that list is Iran, which is the purpose of this debate today, is whether or not America should once again intervene in Iran. I'm just saying, that's a lot of coincidences, guys.
The Iranians have been killing your citizens since 1979.
Where are they killing us?
America has got problems with Iran. That is a major factor, and not some document on a website by somebody who you believe that may or may not be on the payroll of the State of Israel.
Well, I will allow the audience to decide whether or not they think it's coincidental that 6 of those 7 countries have already been toppled, bombed, overthrown entirely. I think that the claim has a lot of merit. But setting that aside, I would like to give you an opportunity to make closing arguments. 2 minutes to you, Meir, and then we'll go to Scott.
At JM Bullion, excellent service and competitive pricing aren't just goals, they're our standard. Our commitment to customer discretion and privacy with secure and confidential transactions has earned us an unparalleled reputation as an online retailer of precious metals, backed by over 375,000 reviews, averaging 4.8 out of 5 stars. Only at JM Bullion.
Look, first of all, let me speak from the heart. As an Iranian Israeli, was born and bar mitzvahed in Tehran. I'm very proud of my Iranian roots. I hope that by this time next year, we'll be able to have this conversation in person in Tehran, next to the US Embassy and near the Israeli Embassy. I think the people of Iran and the people of Israel and the people of America would make tremendous partners in developing this region. Your country has been, as an Iranian Israeli, I have to tell you, a best friend of the state of Israel and one of the best friends of the people of Iran in the contemporary history of Iran. I think that Israel has made mistakes in the past, and we make mistakes with current government. I've lost count of how many protests I've taken part in since the judicial reform in 2003 and since the Gaza war. Of course, Hamas is responsible for this war, but I think the current Israeli government is also making many mistakes inside Israel. I think that the United States of America, Israel does have influence in the United States of America because America is our greatest friend and ally, and we try to have shared interests. Have we made mistakes in the past? Yes, we have. I don't think that we should have tried to undermine the Iran nuclear deal with President Obama, and I think that's just one of the mistakes that we made. Prime Minister Netanyahu going to speak at your Congress, I think that was a terrible mistake. But to believe that what happened in Iraq is because of Israel, and that the reason why your country and the Islamic Republic of Iran don't have relations is because of Israel is grotesquely wrong, intellectually incorrect. The biggest country that has undermined peace between your country and the Islamic Republic of Iran, the biggest person is Ali Khamenei, who has far more power than any Iranian president, and there have been many Iranian presidents who have wanted better relations with your country, but he has stopped it. I say there are numerous reasons why your country doesn't have peace with Iran. The biggest is Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and the organizations that he controls. 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Go ahead. Scott?
Yeah, Scott, closing arguments. You got 2 minutes.
Israel. It's all Israel. I know it, baby. Come on.
Well, America, again, is Israel's greatest ally, but they're nothing but a millstone around our neck. Right. We don't need really to have a Middle East policy at all. We certainly don't need to be the dominant force in the Middle East. We could have a deal with Iran. We could have had one 30 years ago. We could have one right now. I urge everyone, especially, I know the Zero Hedge audience is very sympathetic to Donald Trump and MAGA and all that. And I would say his government, they're saying a lot of positive things right now, and they need all the support they can get to do the right thing to make a new nuclear deal with Iran and to face down Israeli threats. Again, it's in the New York Times 2 days ago that they're trying to sabotage the thing. Or yesterday, sorry, that they're trying to sabotage the thing by threatening war. And speaking of the clean break, and the clean break is not about America's interests at all. It's all about what's good for Israel. And the whole point of it, the clean break meant this is Wormser's proposal and Pearl's proposal for how Israel can, under Netanyahu, can make a clean break from Oslo and from the Rabin strategy of trying to make peace with the Palestinians. And what they said was that instead what we should do is we should get America to overthrow Saddam in Iraq, which they said will weaken Iran and Hezbollah and Syria and empower Jordan and Turkey and Israel. And then Hezbollah will no longer be a threat on Israel's northern flank. And then that way they can continue to confiscate all the Palestinians' property and not have to worry about a threat like Hezbollah on their northern flank while they're continuing to colonize the last measly stinking 22% of Palestine. And this is why 4,500 Americans had to die in Iraq War II. And this is why they're threatening to get us into a war with Iran right now, is for Israel's interests. And if we had a real war with Iran, we have tens of thousands of soldiers in Kuwait, in Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi, all at risk. We have the gates of the Straits of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, which Iran could easily close and destroy the world economy, driving oil over $200 a barrel. And just none of this is in America's interests at all. The policy for MAGA has to be either America first or Israel instead. And if we're going to put America first, then we need to put the last of these diplomatic hurdles out of the way and get back to American independence and peace and prosperity, and heed George Washington's warnings about entangling alliances and making enemies out of all of our friends' enemies, and being involved in having Americans with passionate attachments to the interests of foreign powers that undermine harmony and Republican rule here in the United States of America, our home.
I want to thank both of you for doing this debate. I think it was very, very valuable and could not be more timely, given that we have a very important decision to make as to whether or not we are going to be intervening in Iran. And I think we can all agree, at least, I hope we can all agree, and pray for peace in this moment. And let's hope we can avoid a war so we don't have to argue over whether or not it was on behalf of Israel. I'm Clint Russell. I'm the host of Liberty Lockdown. If you love Zero Hedge, you will love Liberty Lockdown. You can subscribe to that over on YouTube or audio podcatchers. Ami Kozak, thank you so much for co-hosting with me. If you'd like to give any plugs.
Yes, Ami Kozak, it's been a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to moderate and be part of this conversation. I think it was productive and constructive. It got a little tense and heated, but we got Israelis here. We can handle a little back and forth, so it's all good. It was a lot of fun. You guys can follow me at Ami Kozak on Twitter and Instagram, and check out some stand-up. I perform all over the country. It's a great country, and we love that show, right, Scott? It's a great country. So great. So great.
Scott,
any
any plugs, Scott?
Yeah, I wrote the book Provoked about how America started the new Cold War with Russia and the catastrophe in Ukraine. It came out last year, and before that was Enough Already, my history of America's wars in the Middle East since 1979, where people can find a lot of the details of the kinds of stuff that we're discussing today. And I'll go ahead and announce it because it's coming up very soon. The great Tom Woods has built me my own Liberty classroom. It's called the Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom, and everyone can check out and sign up to be the first to find out when it all goes live at scotthortonacademy.com.
Meir?
No, it's been a lot of fun, really. We Israelis do, political debates as a sport. It's a Jewish sport, which we in Israel, we perfected it. So, great exchange of ideas. Of course, to disagree is all even more fun.
Absolutely. Well, I want to again thank Zero Hedge for putting this on, and JM Bullion for sponsoring it. I am Clint Russell. We will see you next time.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.